A poor single dad took in two strange twin girls for one night, never realizing their father was a millionaire. To the single parent listening right now, before we continue, let this remind you, you are not failing. You are fighting. You are brave. You are not alone. And your child is lucky to have you. And to my wonderful viewers, your kindness, your quiet strength, it all matters here. You're part of this story too. The doorbell's chime cut through the storm's roar like a knife through silence. Jake Sullivan froze at his kitchen table, his trembling hands still gripping the electricity bill stamped final notice in angry red ink. The microwave clock glowed 9:47 p.m. Who could possibly be at his door at this hour, in weather like this? Thunder crashed overhead so violently it seemed to shake the very foundation of his modest duplex on Maple Street. Jake's heart pounded as he approached the door. Peering cautiously through the peephole, two figures stood outside, huddled against the storm. Young women, blonde hair plastered to their heads, shoulders hunched against the relentless downpour. In this neighborhood, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. Jake had learned that lesson the hard way these past 3 years. But something about the way they clung to each other, more lost than threatening, stirred something deep in his chest. Something paternal, something that reminded him of. Cracked the door open, chain latch still engaged. "Can I help you?" The taller of the two looked up, and Jake's breath caught. Her blue eyes held such raw desperation it physically hurt to meet them. "Please, sir. We're so sorry to bother you. Our car broke down about a mile from here. We've been walking in this storm, knocking on every door, but no one will help us. We just need to use your phone to call for help." Jake studied their faces in the dim porch light. They couldn't be much older than 20 identical features, marking them clearly as twins. But it was their eyes that cut through him. Wide, frightened, desperate. The same look his 6-year-old Sophie had after a nightmare. She needed her daddy to make the world safe again. "We tried calling our insurance company," second twin added, her voice trembling so badly he could barely understand her. "But the storm knocked out the cell towers. We don't have any cash for a taxi or hotel. We've been walking for hours. Please, we just need help." Jake's practical mind screamed warnings. He didn't know these girls. They could be running a scam. In his old life back in the suburbs, behind gates and security, he would have called the police and let them handle it. But looking at them now, really looking, something overrode every logical concern. He saw his own children. Danny, 8 years old, living 3,000 miles away in Oregon. Sophie, 6, whose bedtime stories he now told through a crackling phone line, twice a week if he was lucky. What if they were ever stranded somewhere? Scared and alone? What if everyone turned them away? "Hold on," Jake said, his voice rougher than he intended. He closed the door, unlatched the chain, and opened it again this time, letting the storm hit him full force. Rain slashed across, the porch drenching him instantly. "Come in. Get out of this weather." The relief on the twins' faces was so overwhelming Jake felt his own eyes sting. "Thank you," they said in unison, stepping into his humble living room. "Thank you so much. We were starting to think we'd have to sleep in our car." Jake grabbed 2 towels from the bathroom, embarrassed by their threadbare condition. Everything in his duplex showed the wear of a man barely scraping by. The wallpaper peeled in places, the heater wheezed like an old man on stairs. And the furniture was mostly second-hand garage sale finds. "Here," he said, handing them the towels. "Dry off. I'm Jake, by the way." The taller twin, clutching the towel like it was spun from gold. "And this is my sister, Samantha." "Oh, me. We can't thank you enough." "We really thought we might freeze out there," Samantha said as Jake shut the door against the howling wind that rattled the old house. "Where's your car now?" Jake asked. "About a mile north on Cedar Avenue," she replied, towel drying. Her blonde hair started making this awful grinding noise and then just died. "We're not from around here. We were just..." She cut herself off, glancing at her sister with a look Jake couldn't quite read. "We were looking at houses for a friend." Jake caught the exchange, but didn't press. Cedar Avenue wasn't exactly a place people went. House shopping, especially not girls who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. But everyone had their secrets, and Jake had learned to respect that. Cedar Avenue isn't a great area to be stranded at night, he said softly. You did the right thing, leaving the car and looking for help. As the twins dried off, Jake couldn't ignore the details that stood out. Their clothes, though drenched, were obviously expensive designer gowns that probably cost more than his monthly bills, leather boots that looked custom-made, and coats straight out of a high-end boutique. What were girls like them doing in a neighborhood like his at nearly 10 at night? The phone's in the kitchen if you want to try calling for help, he offered, setting aside his curiosity. Whatever their story, their distress was real. Amanda picked up the landline, pressing buttons, but only static answered. The storm must have knocked out the phone lines too, she said, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Jake felt that old pull in his chest, the protective instinct that had once driven him to work 8-hour days for his family, the same drive that had cost him everything he loved. Tonight, that instinct whispered only one thing: help them. Look, he said before he could second-guess himself, you can't go anywhere in this weather. The forecast says this storm's going to last all night. You're welcome to stay here until morning. The twins exchanged a look, clearly weighing their options. Trust a stranger or brave the storm. Neither choice was ideal. We don't want to impose, Samantha said carefully, her cultured accent hinting at private schools and country clubs. You've already done so much. You're not imposing, Jake assured, with a wry smile. I've got a couch that pulls out into a bed. It's not the Ritz, but it's dry and warm. Only downside is the breakfast menu's a little limited. Cereal and maybe toast. For the first time since arriving, both girls' smiles that lit up their faces. That sounds absolutely wonderful, Amanda said, and something in her voice suggested she meant it. Jake pulled blankets and sheets from the closet, helping them settle in. Conversation came easily, surprising him. The twins were warm, curious, and engaging in a way that slowly filled the emptiness in his house. They asked about his work, his life, the neighborhood. Normally, Jake avoided personal topics, the wounds still felt too fresh, but something about their sincerity made him open up. I'm an architect, he admitted, while stirring hot chocolate from the last of his cocoa. The warmth of the mug steadied his hands. Well, I was. Now I mostly do freelance drafting work whenever I can find it. That sounds fascinating, Samantha said, curled up on the couch with her steaming mug. What kind of buildings did you design? Jake hesitated, throat tightening as memories returned. Commercial, mostly office buildings, shopping centers. I had my own firm for a while. He left out how it had consumed his life, how chasing success had cost him everything that mattered. What happened to it? Amanda asked gently, then quickly looked guilty. Sorry, maybe that's too personal. You don't have to answer, Amanda said gently. It's okay, Jake replied, surprised at how willing he suddenly was to open up. Something about the storm outside created a cocoon of intimacy, making confessions feel safe.
My life
kind of fell apart 3 years ago. Divorce, business partnership dissolved. I had to sell everything just to pay the lawyers. He thought about stopping there, but the compassion in the twins' eyes, far too deep for their age, urged him to keep going. I have 2 kids, he added quietly, the words scraping his throat raw. Danny's 8 now, Sophie's 6. They live with their mother in Oregon. The twins' expression softened into something impossibly gentle. That must be incredibly hard, Samantha said softly, being so far from them. Jake's vision blurred as the weight of it all hit him again, heavy as the storm battering the windows. Yeah, it is. I call them twice a week, but it's not the same as being there. I miss everything. Soccer games, school plays, bedtime stories. Last week, Sophie lost her first tooth, and I only heard about it 3 days later in a 5-minute phone call. His voice cracked on the last words, and he turned away, embarrassed to break down in front of strangers. What happened? Amanda asked gently. With your wife, I mean? Jake drew in a shaky breath. Rebecca said I was never there, that I cared more about building my business than building memories with my family. And she wasn't wrong. I thought I was providing for them, securing their future, but I was missing their present. By the time I realized what I was losing, it was already gone. The pain in his voice seemed to seep into the small room, blending with the rain streaking the glass like tears. She moved to Oregon for a fresh start, Jake continued, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Said she needed to get away from all the memories. The court gave her primary custody. I see Danny and Sophie during summer breaks and alternating holidays when I can afford the plane ticket. How often is that? Samantha asked, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. This year might be the first time I miss summer, Jake admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Work's been slow, and custody lawyer fees ate up most of my savings. I've been trying to put money aside. He gestured helplessly toward the pile of bills stacked on the kitchen table. The twins listened with an empathy that felt far beyond their years. They asked thoughtful questions, shared pieces of their own childhood. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt the crushing loneliness he carried start to ease. You know what strikes me about your story, Amanda? Said after a quiet moment. You're still fighting for them. Even when everything fell apart, even when it would have been easier to give up, you're still trying to be their father. They're my whole world, Jake said simply. Even if I can't be with them every day, I want them to know their dad never stopped loving them, never stopped trying. As the night went on, Jake learned that Amanda and Samantha had grown up in Connecticut, that they were 22, fresh out of college. They spoke fondly of their childhood, but stayed vague about their family, mentioning only that their father was in business. When Jake asked for details, they deflected. He sensed there was more to the story, but he respected their privacy. After all, he was just a stranger who had given them shelter. You know? Amanda said later, as Jake pulled out the couch and laid out his best sheets. We've stayed in some pretty fancy hotels over the years, but I don't think I've ever felt as welcome anywhere as I do here. That's very kind of you to say, Jake replied, smoothing the sheets across the thin mattress. But I'm sure you're just being polite about my humble place. Really? Samantha insisted, her voice so sincere it made Jake glance up. It's not about the place, it's about the person. You opened your door to complete strangers in the middle of a storm, shared your food, your home, your story. Not many people would do that. I have kids, he said simply, the truth settling in his chest like a warm ember. If Danny and Sophie were ever stranded somewhere, scared and alone, I'd hope someone would help them. I'd pray someone would look past their own fears and choose kindness. Later that night, as the twins whispered softly to each other on the pull-out couch, Jake lay in his own bed listening to the storm slowly lose its fury outside. For the first time in months, his small duplex didn't feel so empty. The quiet murmur of voices, the knowledge that he'd helped someone, that simple thread of human connection, it all reminded him of better days. When his house had been filled with laughter and family sounds. He drifted off to sleep thinking about kindness, about the strange twists of fate that had brought these young women to his door, and about how sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can end up feeling like the most important things in the world. Morning came clear and bright, as if the storm had scrubbed the sky clean. Jake woke early, the habit of a man used to squeezing more hours into his day. To his surprise, both twins were already awake, sitting at the kitchen table and speaking in hushed, urgent tones that fell silent the moment they noticed him. Good morning, he said, offering them coffee in mismatched mugs. How'd you sleep? Better than we have in weeks, Amanda said, wrapping her hands around the cup gratefully. Her tone suggested she meant more than just a good night's rest. After a simple breakfast of toast and the last of his orange juice, Jake offered to drive them back to their car. The twins agreed, though he noticed their reluctance in the way. They exchanged meaningful glances, as if leaving wasn't what they really wanted. The drive was short, the neighborhood now peaceful in the soft morning light. They were quieter than they'd been the night before. Jake caught them watching him in a way that made him self-conscious, like they were trying to memorize his face. Their car was right where they'd left it on Cedar Avenue, a sleek BMW, with Connecticut plates, looking even more out of place in daylight. Jake popped the hood, his construction experience proving useful. Your alternator belt snapped, explained, pointing to the problem. It's an easy fix, but you'll need a tow. Shouldn't cost too much, using Jake's phone. The twins called their insurance company, Within an hour, a tow truck arrived. As they prepared to leave, Amanda pressed something into Jake's hand, a business card, thick with elegant, embossed lettering. "If you ever need anything," she said, her blue eyes unusually bright with emotion, "anything at all, please call this number." Jake glanced at the card, barely registering the details, too caught up in the strange sadness of saying goodbye to these two young women who had briefly brought light into his quiet world. "Thank you," he said, slipping the card into his pocket. "Take care of yourselves. Drive safe." He stood watching as the tow truck disappeared around the corner, carrying Amanda and Samantha with it. Already, the familiar weight of loneliness settled back onto his shoulders like an old coat. The interlude of companionship was over. He was back to the silence of unpaid bills, empty rooms, the gnawing worry of whether he'd see his kids this summer. But something inside him had shifted. Some small spark of hope had been rekindled in those hours of connection. For the first time in months, Jake felt like maybe he could keep going. Over the next 2 weeks, he threw himself into work with renewed energy. He landed a small commercial project, redesigning a local restaurant, enough to help catch up on bills, and maybe if he stretched every dollar set aside money for a plane ticket to Oregon. He thought about Amanda and Samantha now and then, wondering if they'd made it home safely, but the press of daily survival pushed those thoughts aside. The business card went through the wash twice before he finally pulled it out of his jeans pocket and set it on his dresser. Forgotten, but not gone. Then, on a Tuesday morning that began like any other, everything changed. Jake was hunched over his drafting table, pencil in hand, measuring angles for the restaurant plans, when his doorbell rang. He glanced at the clock. 10:30. M. Probably a delivery? Or maybe Mrs. Henderson from next door. He opened the door and froze. Standing there was a man in a perfectly tailored suit that likely cost more than Jake's rent. On either side of him stood Amanda and Samantha Sterling. But it wasn't just their presence that made Jake's knees go weak. It was the way they stood together, the unmistakable family resemblance. The aura of wealth and power radiating from the older man. "Mr. Sullivan," the man said warmly, extending a manicured hand. "My name is Robert Sterling. I believe you've met my daughters." And in that instant, the pieces fell into place with stunning, overwhelming clarity. The expensive clothes on two girls stranded in his rundown neighborhood. The vague answers about their family. The business card he had barely looked at. "Amanda Sterling," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're their father." "I am," Robert Sterling replied, his handshake firm and reassuring. "And I owe you a debt of gratitude I can never fully repay." Amanda stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "I told him everything, Jake. How you were the only one who helped us that night. How you opened your home to complete strangers. How kind you were, even though you had so little to give." "Dad wanted to come sooner," Samantha added quickly, "but we asked him to wait. We needed to be sure about something first." Jake's head spun, with the world tilted sideways as he tried to process their words. "Sure about what?" "Robert." Sterling's smile widened, and Jake could suddenly see where the twins had inherited their warmth. "My daughters are excellent judges of character, Mr. Sullivan. They insisted on doing some research before we approached you." "Research?" Jake asked, a knot of confusion and alarm tightening in his chest. "About your children?" Amanda said softly, her voice gentle but direct. "About your custody battle, your financial struggles, your career background, everything you shared with us that night." Heat rushed to Jake's face. His private failures, his desperate situation, all of it laid bare. Investigated, probably. Discussed around polished tables in corporate boardrooms. The humiliation felt crushing. "Please don't be angry," Samantha said quickly, seeing his expression falter. "We weren't trying to invade your privacy. We wanted to help you the way you helped us." "Help?" Jake's voice cracked. "I don't understand what's happening here." Robert Sterling stepped forward, his expression kind but serious. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm the CEO of Sterling Development Group. We specialize in commercial and residential projects across the Northeast. I reviewed your architectural portfolio, what I could find of I-tanned. I was genuinely impressed. Jake gripped the doorframe, his knees threatening to give out. I still don't understand. What I'm about to offer you, Robert said carefully, isn't charity. It isn't pity. It's good business and recognition of exceptional character. The company's expanding, and we need architects who understand that buildings aren't just steel and concrete. They're dreams made real. The world seemed to slow as Robert continued. I'm offering you a position as senior project architect with Sterling Development Group. The salary would allow you to relocate closer to your children in Oregon. Maybe even pursue joint custody. You'd be designing the kind of projects that matter, buildings that last, that change communities. Jake's vision blurred, the magnitude of the offer hitting him like a physical blow. That's impossible. You can't just give someone a job because your daughter stayed at their house for one night. You're right, Robert said, with a warm laugh free of mockery. I can't. That's not how business works. But I can hire someone whose character has already been tested and proven. Do you know what my daughters told me about that night? Jake shook his head, too stunned to speak. They told me about a man who had every reason to be bitter, who was struggling just to keep the lights on, who could barely afford heat, and yet still opened his door to strangers in a storm. A man who shared his food, his shelter, his story, without asking for anything in return. Amanda wiped her eyes, but spoke firmly. Dad doesn't just build buildings, Jake. He builds teams, communities, futures. He spent his life looking for people who understand that success means nothing unless you lift others up with you. Samantha's cheeks flushed slightly as she admitted, "We weren't stranded by accident that night." "Well, the car really did break down," Amanda admitted. "But we were in your neighborhood because Dad's been looking at developing properties in this area. We'd been driving around for hours, trying to get a feel for the community." Robert nodded. When their car died and they started knocking on doors, it became an unintentional test of the neighborhood's character. 17 houses, Mr. Sullivan. They knocked on 17 doors before yours. 17 families peeked out and chose not to get involved. Jake felt hot tears running down his face as the full weight of it hit him how close he'd come to being number 18. How easily he could have ignored the knock, convinced he already had enough problems of his own. But there's more, Robert continued, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a folder. Sterling Development Group sponsors a comprehensive scholarship program for children of employees. Danny and Sophie would qualify for full college scholarships when the time comes, plus tutoring, summer programs, whatever they need to thrive. The folder slipped from Jake's numb fingers, paper scattering across the step like snow. His legs gave out, and he sank down onto the porch. The sobs came from deep in his chest, 3 years of grief, frustration, and desperate hope finally breaking free. "Why?" he whispered through his tears. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Amanda knelt beside him, laying a hand on his shoulder. "Because you weren't a stranger when it mattered most. You were family." And Samantha joined her eyes, wet with tears. And because Dad always taught us that success means nothing unless you use it to change lives. That night, sitting in your kitchen, listening to you talk about your kids, we knew we'd found someone special. Robert's voice was thick with emotion. My daughters could have called me that night. I could have booked a hotel with their credit cards. But they didn't, because sometimes life puts us exactly where we're supposed to be. That storm wasn't just weather, Mr. Sullivan. It was an opportunity for them to witness real kindness, and for me to find the kind of man I want representing my company. Sitting there on the doorstep, overwhelmed, Jake thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. Driven, successful, obsessed with business while his family slipped away. That man might have looked at Amanda and Samantha and seen networking, opportunities. But the man he was now humbled, broken, stripped down to his values, had only seen 2 scared young women in need of help. And in choosing compassion over caution, kindness over fear, he'd opened a door to possibilities he never imagined. "There's just one condition," Robert said with a grin, helping Jake back to his feet. "Thanksgiving dinner is at our house this year. Amanda and Samantha insist. And when my daughters make up their minds, resistance is futile. Jake laughed through his tears, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. I accept all of it. The job, the opportunity, the dinner invitation. He looked at each of them in turn, still stunned. I can't believe this is real. It's real, Amanda assured him. And there's more. Dad's already spoken with the best family law attorney in Oregon. If you want to pursue joint custody, you'll have the strongest legal support there is. For the first time in 3 years, Jake allowed himself to picture the future, seeing Danny and Sophie more than twice a year, being at soccer games and school plays, tucking them in at night, instead of whispering bedtime stories through static on the phone, not just designing buildings, but building memories. Living the life he had once been too consumed by success to truly embrace. And deeper still, he realized something profound. The ripple effect of kindness. That opening your door to help others could open your heart to blessings you never saw coming. You know what the most amazing part is? Jake said, wiping his face as he looked at the 3 people who had just transformed his world. I almost didn't answer the door that night. I was so tired, so broke, so weighed down by my own problems. I came this close to ignoring the bell and going to bed. But you didn't, Samantha said softly. When it mattered most, when 2 strangers needed help, you chose to care. And that choice, Robert added, changed everything. Not just for you, for all of us. My daughters learned what real character looks like. I found someone who can help me build not just my company, but my legacy. And you're getting your life back. As Jake stood there in the morning sunlight, surrounded by the family who had chosen him for who he was at his lowest moment, he understood something powerful about kindness. It wasn't just about helping others. It was about staying open to grace, to possibilities, to the unexpected ways. Compassion could circle back and transform everything. The storm 2 weeks ago hadn't just cleared the skies. It had washed away his old life, leaving space for something new to grow. 6 months later, Jake Sullivan stood in his new office in Portland, Oregon, staring out at the skyline and thinking about the building he was about to design, a community center for families like his own once had been, struggling to hold on to hope. In the distance, he could see the elementary school where Danny and Sophie would start in the fall, living with him half the time under the joint custody agreement that had finally been approved. His phone buzzed. A text from Amanda lit the screen. Dad's got a new project in Seattle. Guess who's the lead architect? Also, Sunday dinner mom's making her famous lasagna. Jake smiled as he typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Family dinner is sacred, and it was. Because sometimes, when you open your door to strangers in a storm, you don't just give them shelter, you invite miracles into your life. Sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't believing in tomorrow. It's believing that kindness still matters. Compassion changes everything. That love always finds a way. The storm that brought Amanda and Samantha Sterling to Jake's door had lasted only hours. But the kindness he showed them that would last forever, rippling out through generations. Changing lives in ways he was only beginning to understand. Because in the end, we're all just strangers in the storm, hoping someone will hear our knock and choose to open the door.